Hey, I'm Elliot. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time around. I got a question from a subscriber about how I make molds for injecting plastisol. I guess it doesn't really matter. It could apply to anything when you're trying to make a mold, but for this video, I'm just going to do screen capture with the webcam. Everybody seems to be doing it, so why not? Going to try and do it without any cuts. So that probably won't happen, but we'll see. Uh, what we're first going to do is I use Fusion 360, but when I started I used TinkerCAD, and I kind of suggest to everybody to use TinkerCAD. It's just easy, it's free. Um, you might as well just use it, you know. And you get to set up an account for it, but the account is free, so it doesn't matter. It's through Autodesk. It's the same company that does Fusion 360 and all that. So, but when we get in there, just start a new design. So when we're trying to do molds for different things, for me it's for plastisol for making fishing baits, but I guess it applies to anything really that you would need a mold for, and this would apply to, I guess, some other things like CNC as well if you wanted to make aluminum molds or something like that. Aluminium if you're across the pond. But I'm sure there's some limitations to CNC that you would have to take into account that you won't have to do in 3D printing. But there are some in 3D printing that would be a good idea to kind of keep your eye on to make sure you don't do something that's going to be a little bit more difficult to print and get a good final result with. But in TinkerCAD, it always loads with this. Oh, it always loads bad in Google Chrome, by the way. Firefox seems to be a lot better, but it always loads with this weird name, so we'll just do like mold test or something. But TinkerCAD's a very simple engine. It's just a drag and drop. It's like a Tinker Toy kind of situation, which makes it really, really nice for beginners. And what we're going to do is we want to come up with the design that will eventually be our negative. So, I don't know really what we want to do here, but I guess we'll just do kind of like a swim bait of some sort. So we're just going to bring it in. I don't know, that'll be kind of like the body. And you're just clicking with the left mouse button to drag in, and then you can rotate with the right mouse button. So when you click on the object that you have, the dimensional squares come up, and these are all resizing squares. So you can pull it up, pull it down, whatever. So for a swim bait, I'm going to want something like that, probably a little bit, I don't know, something like that. That's called a fusiform body condition. It's like really elongated, like a fish that's long, similar like a shiner, or fathead minnows, stuff like that. Cyprinids, the minnow family. And then the steps here in TinkerCAD, the steps actually mean how, I guess, dense is the mesh. So I always just crank that all the way up to 24. And you can tell that in TinkerCAD you still get this mesh density is not very, very good. It's round, but it's not round. It's good enough. Especially when you're just starting out, it's good enough. And this is all, run through the web browser too, so it's not very hard on the computer. I mean, it is a little bit when you get into more technical stuff, but like multi-layered, kind of lots of different pieces. But for our purposes right now, it should be fine. So I'm going to drag this out just a little bit more. That should be good. Then I can do a Control D with that selected, and that's going to duplicate it in place. So then I can just move this up a little bit, kind of make almost like a head situation on there. And then with TinkerCAD we want to group objects. So we can click and drag all the way across, and that's going to grab two shapes. And you can see that up here in the upper right hand corner. It says shapes 2. So we can group those together by hitting the group button here, and then that makes it one object. So now if we want to modify this object together, it's going to pull the front all the way to the back, whatever, you know. So then we have that grouped, and I don't know, it's a decent body to it, body shape. So I'm just going to pull in this round. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to put a cutout into it. So I'm just moving the shape, moving it around with the right mouse button. I'm just gonna try and get the shape I want, assuming that this blue, the light blue, I guess I could change the color of that so this makes more sense. So the red cylinder, half cylinder, I'm thinking in my head right now that's gonna cut that shape, and that's exactly what we're going to do with it, is we're going to cut it. So I'm going to go here. I don't mind the look of that. I mean, it'll work. Maybe bring this up just a little bit. Maybe down just a little bit. Nah, whatever. Another trick in TinkerCAD, it's not really a trick, it's just a lot of people don't do it when they first start, is this is all snapping to a grid in the X, Y, and Z. So it's all snapping to 1 millimeter. You can tell as I move it up and down, it goes 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can go to the snap grid, and you can either turn that off completely, or you can make it to a higher resolution. So we'll go to like 0.1, and then you can see it's moving down in 1/10 of a millimeter. This helps a lot to get exactly where you want it to go. I'll just snap it back to 1 millimeter just to make life easier. And once you put it back to whatever resolution you want it to snap to, it'll reset and go back to that. It won't just keep going at the 0.1. It'll snap back. So then we set this to a hole, and that means when we go up here into shape and we make it a hole, anything that touches then is going to be cut. It'll become a hole, right? So then we just group this together, and that cuts the bottom off, right? So now we have this kind of weird looking shape that's a little bit different, you know. I don't know what I'm doing really, like, as this isn't going to be a mold for real, but maybe, I don't know. Okay, so we have that kind of fusiform shape a little bit there, and then maybe, I don't know, I'd say kind of we could make this kind of like it would have fins off the side here. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to try and find something that would kind of work as a fin. I don't really know what would really work as a fin, but we'll see. What we can do is maybe we'll do another sphere, just because. We'll make the steps all the way up to 24, and I'll make this a different color so we can see what we're doing. But then I'll go in there, and I'm just adjusting it. If we want this to go separate, if we want it to move, right, to rotate, all we have to do is click the axis that has what we want the move to be, right? So you can see these arrows. If I zoom in on this, you can see these arced arrows. So that means if we move this, it's going to rotate in that direction. If we move this, it's going to rotate in that direction. And if we move this, it's going to rotate on this axis, right? So what I like to do is I like to just make it the size I want. So I'm looking for like a fin like that. maybe, I don't know, 3 millimeters, nothing crazy. And I want that fin to be offset just a little bit, so 45 degrees. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate with Control D again. I'm going to bring this over, and then I'm just going to move this 90. There we go. So now those two are going to meet, right? Because it went 45 one way and then 45 the other way again, so this will meet. And then all I do is just put them in where I want them to be. So then to make sure they align correctly, I'm gonna get them to where I want them to be. So they're lined up. And to get them there, so let's pull these out. We'll do like 35. We'll do this. So we click that, and then we're doing the length at 35. That makes it larger. That's interesting enough. So you can do an align function, which is kind of nice. So you click the two shapes. I'm just holding shift down to get to the next shape. Then I align it. Let's see, where are we at here? Come on, show up. There it is. So we align it to this side. And then what we can do is we can go back in, select those two now, and we can align it. Ugh. Can't do that. Align this side. Those two are aligned. Align this side. They'll step the whole thing over. So sometimes you can get it to work with the smaller one first. So if we do it like this, without screwing up, it'll align. So whichever one you click first is the one that's going to move in the alignment, right? So we want this one to move with respect to the larger. Oh, see, it won't do it either way. This is why after you learn it a little bit, you want to kind of switch to Fusion 360, because things are quite a bit easier. You don't have to do as many workarounds on it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to align these two. Then I'm going to group these two. So now they're grouped together. And then I'm going to align these two. Then I'm going to group those together. So if you're having this kind of issue with the blackout business with TinkerCAD, I'm pretty sure that's a Chrome issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over into Firefox. Yeah, I know it's not my default browser. Don't worry about it. Okay, so we'll try it in TinkerCAD and see what happens. I just kind of like how it moves in Firefox anyway. It seems to do a lot better. So we have this kind of idea here. Let's add a fin to the back. I don't really know what this is, but it seems funny, but this heart object in TinkerCAD seems to work pretty well as a rear fin. So I'm just going to move this to 90 degrees. that to 90, and then I'm going to decide my pitch on here. I'm going to do something like this. Why not? And then I'm just going to mate it up into here. Something like that. Now those two are together. And then we go up and we group them again. And then I'm just gonna do a box because that's what I do. And then if I was really smart, I would have remembered what angle I had made the heart, but yeah, I didn't. So to me that looks pretty good, and that's going to cut that off, that remaining, the little tail part. So then that's cut off, and we got some weird whale looking thing that would be decently hard to cast, but not impossible. So then at this point, this is all one object because it's been grouped together. Move that around. I'm going to bring it down to, well, let's see, kind of like that look. This look right there, probably. So it's 108. It's 108 millimeters. Oh, it's okay. So that's another trick in TinkerCAD. If you're up here and you don't quite know where you're at, this one's always in there. That's always going to tell you your base of your model. So you can just put 0 in there, bring it back to 0. It's not really a trick, but it helps with workflow quite a bit. But then we can bring this down. I don't know, I like the look of that. So now we have our negative. So I am going to use just a larger box, right? So we're just going to bring this in, just make a box. Something like that's fine. I don't really like red, I like yellow. Yellow seems to show shadows a lot better, so that's what I use quite a bit. I want this a little bit thinner. There we go. Okay, so you know, when making a mold in TinkerCAD, it's the same process as you would make it anywhere else, right? So I like to do, so when the box is up like this, you can just click that and bring it down below the work plane, because we will eventually need 2 halves anyway. So bring that, duplicate with a Control D, and then I set this back to 0. And then I know I have both halves of my mold already situated, right? So then we go back to our model and we set that at 90 degrees sideways. So you just go back up to the function for 90. It's kind of nice in TinkerCAD too. You stay to the inside dash marks and it moves it for you a set amount. In this case it's whatever, 22.5. But as you go out, then you can go to individual like 1 degree increments, and then if you go all the way out here, you get a lot better control on where you want to set that. But we're just going to go to 90 degrees from the build plate, and then we're going to duplicate this again just to have it. Duplicate it over here, so anything we do now in the future, we have that extra, you know, model sitting over there in case we mess something up. So then we're going to go and look at how tall this is. So it's 15.31 millimeters tall. And just for the ease of this, this model doesn't have to be exact, right? So I'm just going to make it 16. So it's 16 millimeters wide for the swim bait, but 16 millimeters tall in this scenario. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this, we're going to go to how far it is off the work plane, and we're going to put in -8, because that's half of 16. So now we know that the model we have is sitting halfway in there, right? So we have that in there where we want it. Now what we have to do is add pore holes and the holes to escape, let either gases escape or steam escape in the case of plastisol. So we're going to go in and we're going to add those. And with this mold, I would pour from the top, I would think, probably just straight off of here, off of the front. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make my sprue holes, and they're just going to be whatever. I don't even, you get the idea. Like, we're not going to actually pour this thing, but you get the idea. You want the sprue hole big enough to accept the inlet of your injector, but you also want the sprue hole small enough to where you're not going to be over injecting plastisol. So we're just going to bring it in, 10 millimeters, seems fine. I'm going to go in here. So if it's at 10 millimeters, we want it at -5, and that'll put it halfway in between that mold. And then we're just, let's see, we can stage this as well, right? So we have this one, we're going to Control D, we've copied it, and then I'm going to go in there and I'm going to adjust this to, I don't know, let's say 6 millimeters and 6 millimeters. So that way this is now 6 millimeters instead. And then we're going to do our align task, our align tool. We're going to align those two together. We're going to click. We've selected 3 shapes here. We can see that's the big base, and then also these two. So we just hold shift down and we click off the base, and then we can group these together. And then I'm just going to align it per however I think is fitting for this to align. So ideally what you would do is you would bring this all the way in, right? So like that. And then I regroup them. Okay, so now we have our actual pore hole. So now we need maybe like a sprue somewhere, definitely off of the tail, right? We're definitely going to need one off of the tail here. So I'd probably do one just straight out. So we'll bring this in again, and we'll just make this one really small, 2 millimeters, probably all we're going to need. Then we go in and we grab this. So if we're at 2 millimeters, we want to bring it down to -1. Okay, it's pretty easy. Then we're just going to bring that out. Set. Okay. So, I mean, you can get as complicated or as simple with this as you want, right? It's very simple after you start recognizing, like, oh, this is rather easy. But so if this is the mold that we're going to try, and honestly I would have one coming out of here as well. Maybe, I mean, it might push it through. If you're injection molding, it'll push it to the end of this fin. If you're pouring, like, say, not that. You know, if you were pouring like tin or pewter or lead or something like that, I would add additional vent holes, or it won't go through there, I guess. I don't know. You could try it. So, the problem with this now that I didn't recognize earlier is that we can't have this in a two-part, or this is going to come up. For instance, when this mold comes apart from each other, this fin's going to go with it. So that was a bad design on my part, right? But we can go back in and we can fix that. So we can go in there, and then instead of having it on two separate sides, what we can do is go in there, ungroup again, ungroup it all the way. What is going on? There we go. And just for the ease of this demonstration, I'm just going to get rid of this one, and we're just going to go something like this. I don't really know what that is, but a fish might bite that. Fish are pretty stupid. They bite random stuff all the time. Good enough for the purpose of this. I'm okay with that. So then I will get everything centered again. I'll group it. So, really? That's the problem you run into as well. So, you have to do the order of operations you do TinkerCAD in is also another reason why TinkerCAD's not a lot of fun, but it works and it's free. So you have to group all the things you want to group individually. So I'm holding shift down and I'm selecting those ones that I want to group, right? Because I don't want to group the negative yet. I don't want to group what's going to cut yet. So go back in here, I group all those together, then I come back through and I group the cut. That was a lie. Screwed that one up too. Ugh. Okay, you go through, you group everything that you want to group. I want the cut grouped. I want this, and I want that grouped. So I group all those. There. Now I can group this and this together, because that's our sprue hole. That's what we want grouped. Okay. So now we have our pour. We have our pour hole, and we have our sprue holes, and then we have our base that we can put in right wherever we had it before. Now, this is a little bit of the trickier part, is you want index holes to allow putting both molds together. And it's a little tricky to do in TinkerCAD, but it's not impossibly tricky. It's just a little bit tricky. So we'll walk through that real quick. So you just want one cylinder, large. We'll make for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll make large index holes, right? So we'll do 4 of them. So Control D. Control D. That probably, showed up somewhere weird. Control D. Okay. And we'll just put them in goofy, random, whatever. It's there, 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 That looks good. Okay, so this is going to be our index locations. But what we have to do is, because TinkerCAD is going to want recesses in one and spikes in the other, we're going to have to kind of do this twice. So we're going to put these holes down. I'd say, I don't know, where did they go? How tall are they? 20. So we'll put these just down -10, because that just makes life easier. So they're down -10. So now what we have to do is we have to bring in a cylinder that's slightly smaller than those. So that's too big even. So 19.8 millimeters. 19.8 millimeters. Because the diameter of these larger holes is 20 millimeters. So what we're going to do is we're just going to match those up with this. So we're going to bring that down to -10, and I'm going to duplicate that. I'm just going to bring them all the way out here. You can do this all as one mass, one as well if you want to, but I'm just doing it like this. So then you find an area where you can select both of these. Then we're going to do the align on these. We're going to center them. So now it's centered on the X and centered on the Y, and they're already centered on the Z. So we're going to do it for this one as well. Not that. We're going to do it for this. Stop selecting that. Stop selecting that. Stop selecting that. Okay, that's just frustrating. That's frustrating is what that is. Okay. I'm just going to go through and select them with Shift. We'll go through. Now we're just lining them up. That's all we're doing. So I'll select all three. So I know I've selected those two cylinders, but I also selected the bottom, so I held Shift down to get rid of it. Yeah, did that again too. So what you can do is you can model the inner part of the mold without this section on the bottom, but I just like doing it with it on there so I can kind of get an idea of where it is. So now what we have going on here is we have the index holes with the spikes for the indices in place, so they're stuck in place in the mold. So that allows us to add it to one side and not add it to the other side. So what we have to do in TinkerCAD is, because we're going to have to make two sides of the mold, what we have to do is we have to make essentially doubles of the things that we need on each side of the mold. And what that's going to be is our model in the middle. So we're just going to click it somehow. Let's get there. Okay, so we're going to make it a hole because we want it negative. And then I'm just going to do a Control D. It's copied. Now you can't see it, but it's copied on there. It's on top of the other one. So then I'm just going to bring this one over, and we're going to match it up on top. And this is why the snap to grid is really helpful, because it will snap right there. And then I like to just do this as transparent so I can see what's going on in there. So for this one, what we're going to do is, ideally, I would have this one have the actual posts for the indices. So what I'm going to do first for this one is we're going to actually wait on it, and this one's going to have the negatives. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click this, I'm going to click shift with this, shift with this, shift, shift. Okay, so now I have all 5 of those objects. What I have is the negative of the model, the negative of the indices, the holes themselves, and then I'm going to select the bottom half of the mold. And when I group this, right, so now it's grouped, I can actually remove this one, right, and we have the negative of what we want the mold to be with the index holes, okay? But I'm going to keep that in place for a second, because now I'm going to come here, I'm going to put my next half on it, so then this is going to have the posts inside, okay? So I'm going to put that in there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the bottom. I'm going to set this back to non-transparent, and then I'm going to just group this one. Okay, and then we'll flip it over. If it would work out, I'll flip it over. There. And then move. What I can do is probably put all this to 0 so it actually looks better. Okay, so now what we have is a 2-part mold with indices, I guess you would say, index holes in it, so you can put them together quick, with a sprue hole and some vent holes, or with a pore hole and some sprue hole. So you can apply this pretty much to anything that you want to do. It's really, really nice to have a mold that actually indexes into itself, instead of trying to line it up and have it work. As far as my experience so far with trying to pour molds with plastisol into 3D printing, I've seen, the reason I tried to start doing it is because I saw people online doing it, or at least attempting to do it. I don't quite know how they're doing it, because I ran it with PETG, and my plastisol was too hot for the PETG. It just warped and bent. So maybe if you're printing ABS, something like that. I'm gonna try it again. Probably do a coat of epoxy on the inside of the 3D print and see if that works. But hopefully you enjoyed this. This is real quick. This is TinkerCAD, right? It is not super complex software. There's much better ways to do this. I'm sure if you know, just drop it down in the comments below, some better ways. Fusion 360 is a great tool. That's free if you're not making any money off of it, so I recommend doing that if you're interested. It's also an Autodesk product. You can find that on the interwebs. But hopefully you found this helpful, and hopefully it gives you some ideas on something to do, and hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.